The boots were the first thing he noticed, not the fence, not the watchtowers, not even the sky, which was wider here than he remembered sky could be. It was the boots. The American guard's boots were clean, not polished like an officer's, just clean, like someone had actually bathed. In the camps before this one, the guard's boots always told you something. Mud meant a long shift. Mud meant irritability. Mud meant keep your eyes down and your mouth shut. But clean boots? He didn't have a rule for clean boots. His name was Werner, 23 years old. A corporal in the Wehrmacht who had been captured 6 weeks ago in North Africa, shipped across an ocean he had never seen before, and deposited into a processing camp in the American interior. He had survived 3 transfers, each one worse than the last, each one teaching him the same lesson, that being a prisoner meant being less than a person, a number, a problem to be managed. So when the truck pulled up to Camp Alva, and he stepped out with the others into the flat Oklahoma wind, he was already doing what he had learned to do. Shoulders tight, eyes forward, body ready, ready for the shout, ready for the prod, ready for whatever came next. What came next was a man named Private Harold Moss, who was 21, from a small town in Ohio, and who looked almost bored as he checked names off a clipboard. Werner watched him carefully. That was another thing he had learned. Study the guards before they study you. Know which ones enjoy it. Know which ones are just doing a job. Harold Moss looked like just a job. But Werner had been wrong before. They were lined up along the side of the road. 7 of them from his truck. The afternoon sun pressed down flat and heavy, and the air smelled like dry grass and something faintly metallic. Maybe the fence, maybe the heat itself. Werner's back was damp under his shirt. He kept his chin up. That, at least, was something he could control. Harold walked the line slowly, comparing faces to names. He stopped in front of Werner, looked down at the clipboard, looked up. Becker. Jar. Werner straightened automatically. His right arm came up halfway in a reflex he couldn't stop, the habit of 3 years of military life, the salute that his body remembered even when his mind told him not to bother. Harold looked at the half-raised arm. Then he said something that Werner's English, limited as it was, just barely caught. "You don't have to salute me here." The arm stopped, frozen at a strange angle, not quite up, not quite down. Werner stared at him. He waited for the rest of the sentence. There was always a rest of the sentence. "You don't have to salute me here, because you're nothing, or because I'll make you do something worse, or some version of humiliation dressed up as permission." But Harold had already looked back down at his clipboard. He made a small check mark, moved on to the next man. Werner's arm came down slowly. His body stayed rigid. He didn't understand what had just happened. The first week was the strangest of his life, and he had lived through some strange weeks. The barracks were simple but solid. 3 meals a day, actual meals, not the thin soup and hard bread he had expected. There was a common area. There were tables. Some of the older prisoners had started a small garden along the eastern fence, and no one had stopped them. In the evenings, if the weather was right, you could hear someone playing a harmonica somewhere in the camp. Werner kept waiting for the trick. He had seen it before, in theory, the moment of false comfort before the real treatment began. Give a man a blanket and a warm meal, then take both away. It worked better than taking nothing at all, because then the man knew what he was missing. So he ate carefully, slept lightly, watched. What he watched was Harold Moss. Not because Harold was unusual. That was the strange part. Harold was completely ordinary. He did his rounds. He drank coffee from a battered tin cup. Sometimes he stood near the fence and looked out at the flat horizon like he was thinking about something that had nothing to do with any of them. He never raised his voice. He never made a point of being in charge. Once Werner saw a younger prisoner, a boy named Klaus, barely 18, who still cried sometimes at night when he thought no one heard, drop his food tray in the mess line. The tray clattered loud enough to make everyone look. Klaus froze, the way Werner had seen men freeze when they expected the blow that came after the mistake. Harold, who was passing nearby, bent down, picked up the tray, handed it back. That was all. Klaus stood there with a tray in his hands, blinking like he had witnessed something impossible. Werner turned back to his food. His jaw was tight. He couldn't name what he was feeling. It wasn't gratitude. That would have required him to accept that something decent had happened, and he wasn't ready to accept that yet. About 3 weeks in, Werner was assigned to an outdoor work detail. Some of the prisoners were being taken to help with farm labor in the area. Voluntary, they were told, with small wages paid in camp currency. Werner had volunteered not because he wanted to, but because the walls were starting to press in on him and he needed to see something that wasn't fence. They were driven out to a wheat farm owned by an old man who met them in the yard with a look on his face that Werner recognized. Suspicion. Maybe something harder. The old man had a son, one of the other workers quietly explained later. The son was somewhere in the Pacific. Werner understood the look. He would have worn the same one. They worked through the morning in the heat. It was hard, physical work, and Werner was grateful for it in a way he hadn't expected. There was something simple and honest about working land. You put effort in, something happened. The rules were clear. At midday, Harold, who had come along as escort, sat down under a tree at the edge of the field and ate his lunch alone. Werner ate with the others a short distance away. Nobody spoke much. After a while, Harold stood up, walked over, and set something on the ground near Werner, a small wax paper package. He said a word Werner didn't know, then walked back to his tree. Werner looked at the package, then at the man next to him, an older sergeant named Friedrich, who had been a schoolteacher before the war and whose English was better. What did he say? Werner asked quietly. Friedrich had watched the whole thing. He said his wife packed too much. Werner looked at the package again. Inside was half a sandwich and 2 cookies wrapped carefully, the way someone's wife would wrap something for someone she wanted to be okay. He didn't open it for a long time, just sat with it in his hands in the noon heat, feeling the weight of it, which was almost nothing, and the weight of everything it meant, which was much harder to hold. When he finally ate it, he kept his face turned slightly away from the others. He didn't know why, exactly. Maybe because some things, when they crack you open even a little, are better witnessed alone. He never talked to Harold directly. Their language gap was too wide, and Werner wasn't sure what he would have said anyway. Thank you felt too small and also too large. And it wasn't really about the sandwich. It was about something that didn't have a word in either language. It was about the salute. You don't have to salute me here. Werner had turned those words over so many times they had worn smooth, and somewhere in the 3rd week or the 4th he stopped waiting for the trick. Not because he fully trusted the place. He didn't, couldn't, maybe never would. but because he had finally understood something. He hadn't known how to exist in a place where his dignity was not constantly being tested, where the daily negotiation of survival, the calculation of how to stand, how to answer, how to disappear just enough, was not required. He had spent so long learning to endure cruelty that the absence of it had felt like a different kind of threat. The terrifying thing wasn't the fence or the guards. The terrifying thing was the slow, quiet realization that some part of him had forgotten what it felt like to be treated like a person, and that relearning it, this far from home, in a flat and windswept place he had never imagined, would take longer than the war itself. He didn't know if he would ever fully get there. He suspected he wouldn't. Some things once bent don't return to their original shape. But on a warm evening near the end of his second month, he sat outside the barracks with Friedrich and a few others, listening to the harmonica, and for a few minutes he didn't think about any of it. The music was a German folk song, slow and a little sad, and the sky above Oklahoma was turning colors he didn't have names for. He just sat and breathed, and for a moment nothing more was required, like subscribe and stay for more powerful human stories that truly stay with you.